It's our second day in Romania, and it's so early we've missed breakfast at the hotel. In an online global game of cops and robbers, intel doesn't get any fresher than speaking to the cops fighting the fraudsters. This officer is involved in a number of current investigations. Part of agreeing to this interview was that we would go to their press room, but we would not show his face or disclose his name.
I mentioned earlier that my first awareness of this part of the world, and a very ignorant, I will say it's a very ignorant viewpoint, was picking up newspapers like The Guardian when I was in London, and I was in Ireland and I picked up a newspaper, and then colleagues of mine were like, oh, the Washington Post and the New York Times are talking about this place called Hackerville. And I went over there myself and expected like something, like I said, from the show Mr. Robot, you know, very dark, and it's not. It's this beautiful countryside place. Have you had any encounters with that part of Romania?
Bineînțeles că în activitatea noastră curentă am investigat și am avut în lucru dosare care priveau grupul de criminalitate organizată din acea regiune. Deci n-aș putea spune că, cel puțin din punctul nostru de vedere, Vâlcea este chiar pe primul loc Râmnicu Vâlcea.
In this game of, like, we've often described it as a game of cat and mouse.
Da.
You guys and SEON, the FBI, who we've spoken to as well, like, who's the cat and who's the mouse, or does it keep changing?
Well, de obicei noi suntem pisica, noi urmărim, să zicem, infractorii. Din punctul nostru de vedere, raportul nu s-a schimbat niciodată, adică noi am fost tot timpul în urmărirea infractorilor. N-au fost situații în care să se schimbe rolurile.
But I knew that from the smile.
Vă dați seama că numărul persoanelor care au cunoștințe ridicate în informatică în ultimii 20 de ani a crescut foarte mult. Ce am văzut noi din activitatea zilnică, ce a împins pe oameni să fie implicați în aceste activități, lăcomia, în unele situații lipsa de educație, lipsa altor oportunități. Adică am văzut toate aceste sentimente care motivau o persoană să comite infracțiuni. Dar, în principal, lăcomia este pe primul loc. Și oamenii care conștientizează ceea ce fac, ușor, vor încerca să se folosească de persoanele care au venituri mai mici, care nu au alte posibilități, pentru a-i ajuta în activitatea lor curentă.
On the whole, in your experience, so only speaking to what you found, how many number in roughly, like a spectrum between the groups, like how big are they, and is there like almost like a structure with, yeah, like you said, there's a beginner, there's like a middle person, and then there's like the top, or is it a completely different structure?
Și asta este o întâmplare destul de dificilă. De ce? Pentru că fenomenul este dinamic. Inclusiv modul în care evoluează și se formează un grup și în funcție de cât timp au la dispoziție să activeze, și componența lor se schimbă. Dar, în general, avem o persoană, un așa zis lider, da, care nu are neapărat cunoștințe tehnice, dar are influență în zonele respective. Este ajutat de câțiva prieteni de încredere, apar în grup și oameni tehnici care au o pregătire tehnică mai ridicată și ulterior apar în grup diferite persoane cu diferite roluri. În funcție de infracțiunea pe care o comit, și rolurile sunt diferite. Pentru a posta anunțuri, pentru a scoate bani, pentru a vorbi la telefon. Dar numeric nu pot să vă spun că poate să difere de la grup la grup. În general, rolurile sunt divizate. De obicei, nu este doar un singur actor care face toate aceste activități.
When you catch someone, what is the penalties facing them, and what are the rules sort of within your legal system here to deal with them?
Vă dați seama, este dificil de vorbit acum despre o pedeapsă. De ce? Pentru că de obicei sunt mai multe tipuri de fapte comise, mai multe acte materiale și pedeapsa finală poate fi dată de un procuror în cadrul unui acord de recunoaștere a vinovăției sau de către un judecător după ce se termină, după ce se soluționează cauza. Poate să difere de la câteva luni până la 10 ani, dar nu pot să spun exact acum o pedeapsă. Se pot adăuga, pe lângă infracțiunile informatice, mai multe tipuri de infracțiuni informatice. Ai faptele de constituire a grupului infracțional organizat, ai anumite fapte conexe, de fals, care pot fi văzute și pedepsele se calculează în funcție de regulile generale stabilite de Codul de Procedură Penală, dar nu pot să spun acum care este pedeapsa. Da, lucrez în poliție din 2004, de 18 ani. Ultimii 8 ani de zile am petrecut în structura de combatere a criminalității informatice. Anterior am lucrat la Europol pentru 5 ani și înainte de Europol la unitatea care se ocupa cu combaterea traficului de droguri.
Obviously, you're based here in Bucharest. What's your opinion on how best to tackle something that is global?
Cum vedem noi modul de abordare al acestui fenomen, bineînțeles prin perspectiva unei bune cooperări cu partenerii noștri din celelalte țări, atât la nivel judiciar cât și la nivel polițienesc. Totodată și la nivel european și la nivel național acordăm o mare atenție parteneriatului cu mediul privat, pentru că multe probe și date vin de la acești parteneri.
We've now spoken to two people on the front line of cracking cybercrime here in Romania. But with fraud being a truly global problem, and with the police officer talking about international partners, we need to leave Romania for a short time and go to San Francisco. What's in San Francisco, I hear you ask? Well, Special Agent Scott Hellman is, of the FBI, and he's agreed to speak to us about how fraud and fighting it is a truly global issue.
My name is Scott Hellman. I'm a supervisory special agent with the FBI. I've been investigating or managing cybercrime investigations for over 14 years. The team that I manage now, we only focus specifically on what the Bureau would consider criminal cybercrime. Partnerships is really what it comes down to. We have legal attachés who sit around the world, and their sole role is to develop and maintain relationships with law enforcement in over 200 countries worldwide. We don't have jurisdiction outside the United States, but what we have is strong relationships. And so when we identify whether it's a server or whether it's a subject of a cybercrime located in another country, we leverage our partnerships to help us identify the data that we need or work with another country to arrest a subject in that other country. So it's those partnerships that really help us expand our ability to perform our investigations. We've talked about two different things. Is what's the process for when something happens, how do we deal with it, right? And there are many processes in place depending upon the relationship we have with particular countries. There are treaties, there are different types of legal process that we can serve. Every country is a little bit different, but oftentimes it's making that initial phone call and reaching out to our partner to say, hey, there's whatever the problem is, there's this problem. There's a person who's there, there's a piece of infrastructure or a computer that's there we've identified. How can we work together to solve this, right? But even when we can work through that problem, I don't know that that's necessarily getting in front of it or preventing it. It's more of a reactionary type of stance, but it's a way to solve investigations. As an investigator, when I was investigating my own cases, I think there's this element, it's a very intellectual challenge, because the people who are committing these crimes many times are extremely intelligent. The fundamental question you're trying to answer in criminal cyber investigations is who did it? You typically know something about what happened, what was taken, how it happened in some capacity, but you don't know who did it. And you're looking for one in 7.6 billion people. That's a huge challenge. Many of these cases take years and years of painstaking effort of collecting small digital breadcrumbs and then finding that person. Even if you're never able to actually arrest them or what have you, it's that piece of that challenge of the mystery. Working in the Bay Area, many of our victims are large corporations, and it has an effect on them, and it can be very, very damaging financially, but also many of them have the capability to absorb a reasonable amount of damage from cybercrime. But what most people don't think about is if you're a cyber criminal and you steal, this is financially motivated cybercrime, and you steal some amount of money, you need to launder it, you need to move it, you need to do something with it. And the way that they do that is by taking advantage of typically lonely or elderly people through a variety of other types of scams so they can get access to their bank accounts and move money. And through that process, through taking advantage, they're often scamming those lonely people as well through a variety of different means, stealing their entire life savings. And so the underlying the initial sort of breach or hack is a whole slew of people who've been taken advantage of, and their lives are completely destroyed. And we see that piece of it day in and day out, and it's extremely sad because once it happens, there's really not much to do. The money's gone, they can't recover it. Even after they've lost their entire life savings, many victims still don't understand that the person they were talking to that they thought was a love interest online was in reality a cybercriminal. They still are just fiending for a human connection. We're going to end up in a cycle like this, and we probably have, and will continue over the years, where we have the capability of, through education and technical tools, reducing certain elements of cybercrime, but criminals will find a way to circumvent various different techniques that we have. And I think if you're looking specifically at financially motivated cybercrime, underlying it's somebody who wants money. And I would posit that they want money for one of probably two different reasons. Either one, they don't have enough, or two, they're greedy and they want more than enough. And then if we're seeing a constant trend, I'm gonna guess that somewhere in there, our criminals fall in maybe one of those two different categories. And until we can look at the underlying reasons why people commit crimes in general, and not just fraud and cybercrime, I think we're gonna continue to see a rise and continue to have to battle it. If you look at statistics for the last many years, cybercrime has been on the rise, no question. Let's talk about maybe 2019, 2020, and 21, and we'll look specifically at one type of cybercrime called business email compromise. So business email compromise is fairly simple. It's, as a cyber criminal, I'm going to try and gain access to an email account, typically at a business. I'm going to read through that email and look for the next big financial transaction that's coming up. And I'm going to use my access to that email to try and trick someone into deferring the funds from where they're supposed to go to a bank account that I can control. Very simple, but very, very effective. 2019, we saw about $1.7 billion in losses just from BEC alone. It's the highest number every single year. It's always the highest cybercrime that gets reported in terms of damages. Then 2020, we got 1.8 billion. 2021, a large increase to 2.4 billion. And while I don't have all of the answers as to why there's that increase, as an investigator, I can look at a handful of different reasons as to why that might be. Phishing is very commonly used as a spur for many, many different types of cybercrime. And the reason why it works and why business email compromise works is really a handful of different reasons. Number one is creating a sense of urgency in the victims. You are late on your payment. It's really important that you get this paid today. Something along those lines. Or it could be enticing you. Hey, this is something we think you might want, a prize that you've won, something along those lines, enticing you to make an urgent choice. Two is typically some sort of change in business practice. During COVID, we've switched banks. Now instead of paying it to bank A, we need you to pay it to bank B. And of course, I, as the criminal, control that bank account at bank B. Again, trying to get you to divert funds to a place that I want. And then the third one, possibly a sense of confidentiality. It's a slightly different variation, but I'm trusting you with this very, very sensitive task. And you can't tell anyone about it because it's very sensitive until once it goes public you can say, but for now I need you to do this thing. I need you to make this payment to facilitate a fund transfer, whatever it will be, right? So we're talking about three things. We're talking about urgency, confidentiality, and we're talking about a change in business practice. And if you think about what was going on at the beginning and all throughout COVID, it was an immediate sense of urgency. Then we're talking about a change in business practice. It was non-stop change across the board. Now it's telework, it's now you're at home instead of at work. You're using this new VPN client instead of whatever software you're using at work. Now you're using this laptop or whatever it is, a constant change. And then also, if we're talking about confidentiality, what better way to prevent people from telling someone about an email they received by isolating them in their homes? We were all at home, and it would be all too easy if I received sort of a strange email to poke my head over the cube and say, hey, did you get this email too? it takes a little extra step for me to pick up a phone or use, some tool. So I think looking at those three things, cyber criminals have been using those methods well before COVID, but the pandemic provided this perfect recipe for phishing and business email compromise to be just that much more effective. And the last thing that I could really think of regarding the pandemic is that phishing and cybercrime works really, really well. You're the most susceptible when you're not paying attention, when you're distracted. It's the end of the day, you've got a million emails to look at, and now you're trying to get to whatever the next thing is. And so you're racing and racing and racing. And through COVID, we had so many different distractions, from fear to whatever it was going to be. And so I think looking at that as a whole, COVID provided, again, this very strong recipe for cybercrime to be just that much more effective. There are many companies that use different tools to look and identify, whether it's using AI or ML, to identify, is this a phishing email or not? And the whole purpose of all of those, of course, would be to root out all phishing emails so that the end client, the person who's reading the email, never gets a phishing email. Well, so far we're not at that stage yet. And so the purpose of the tools is to reduce the number of malicious emails that end up in front of someone. But then also, you have humans reading emails, and if there's even one email that comes through that's malicious, you have a statistical probability of someone having to be in the right state of mind to be susceptible to it.
We've spoken to the men charged with bringing fraudsters to justice and bringing charges against them. Where do we go from here? Next week, we speak to two experts working on the cutting edge of fraud prevention online. So, to me, there feels to be only one part of the story I don't have. A criminal, someone caught, who can tell us the other side of the story. I get access to a prison in Romania where I get to speak to a convicted fraudster serving 9 years for his crimes.